Hello there, my name is Andrew Games and I am the founder of Panaworks Pictures and the creator of the multi-award winning stylised neo-western Dandylicious. Today, myself and the team behind Panaworks Pictures are going to take you, the audience, on a quick walk through some of the amazing locations that we filmed at in Merseyside to help create the world of Dandylicious. See it as a sort of porthole into the past, experiencing the reality of what it was like to be a part of the first real youth subculture, the Tads.
The film you are about to see, once it's released this year, was a huge undertaking. Creating a costume drama, era-specific, on a shoestring budget is not an easy thing to do for any film company. And that's especially true for an independent film company like yours truly at Panaworks Pictures. Not only do you need to consider era-specific designs and costumes for characters, the way they speak, what they speak about, you also must consider something called the mise-en-scène. Mise-en-scène is a French term which literally means what is in the scene or what is in the shot in a film's case, and it's deeper than some people realise. Every item you see on screen in a movie is thought about and placed to explain the context of a story, and even sometimes tells parts of the story without a single word being spoken to the audience. Dandylicious is set in 1959, towards the tail end, no pun intended, of the first great teddy boy movement. But how do you make the world real without the ability to shut off an entire street and install street dressings? How do you do it without a digital effects team, without the power of a big studio making all of these things happen? Let me show you our first location. The first stop of our Dandylicious location tour is a small industrial village that has been preserved through the dedication of people living here for the last century. These are the cobbled streets of Port Sunlight on the Wirral, a Victorian company town built for the workers of the Lever Brothers Soap Company, which later became the world-famous consumer goods manufacturer, Unilever, whose products you likely have in your house right now. The history of this company begins right here in 1888, with the Lever Brothers' famous product, Sunlight Soap, which is where this village gets its name. Port Sunlight is an icon of Victorian design, a labyrinth of sturdy suburban housing. Each house has its own private garden, which was a novel and exciting thing for working class people in the 19th century. So used to the cramped, hyper-urban, smoggy cities that were the centres of industry back then, the architects, one of whom was William Lever himself, had an eye on the past, creating grandiose structures in the Beaux-Arts style, taking hints from ancient Greek and Roman architecture with a touch of the French and Italian Renaissance. They had an eye on the Victorian present, creating impressive gardens, galleries and public spaces like the Dell Park and the Lady Lever Art Gallery, which William Lever built in honour of his wife. Port Sunlight also had an eye on the future, with trailblazing profit-sharing operation that supported all of these things, as well as the growth and prosperity of the village and its people. The whole concept of this place, unlike the bare-bones affairs of mining and company towns of the same era, has a joy and a hope built into it. It's a place where every house was designed and styled by a different architect in order to show each person who lived here that they were an important part of the life and work of their community. Its uniqueness has been a constant draw for film and television projects. As well as Dandylicious, there have been many other on-screen moments for Port Sunlight. Its uniqueness has been a constant draw for film and television projects. As well as Dandylicious, there have been many other on-screen moments for Port Sunlight. Thomas Shelby has visited here in the smash hit BBC television serial Peaky Blinders. 1981 Best Picture Oscar winner Chariots of Fire features Port Sunlight, British crime drama Away Days, as well as 2019's Tolkien, the biopic of the Lord of the Rings author. Tolkien spent time in Lancashire, which Merseyside was a part of at the time, to write his beloved fantasy trilogy. And Port Sunlight certainly has a hint of that peaceful and secluded life of Bilbo Baggins' home, the Shire.
Good morning.
What do you mean? Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or perhaps you mean to say that you feel good on this particular morning? Or are you simply stating that this is a morning to be good on?
All of them at once, I suppose.
So right now I am standing on the same street that was filmed as Aunt Polly's Street in the BBC television serial Peaky Blinders. So Port Sunlight was actually the most filmed location for Dandylicious. I'd say about 60 to 70% was filmed in Port Sunlight. It's a very historical location, but it's also very versatile as well. There's no place that looks the same as another spot within this area. So there were many scenes that were meant to look like a completely different place in the fictional town of Listminster in the film, that was just filmed within this radius, and it was a lot of fun to play with. One of my favourite memories was actually the first time that we filmed here. It was the scene in Dandylicious where Brenda, Jade Mark's character, and Marty fell out with one another next to a park bench, which is just in the park right behind you. We got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. We arrived on time. We wanted to beat all the dog walkers, and we got as far as that, except one thing we didn't consider was gardeners, and the fact that gardening takes place very early in the morning here at Port Sunlight. And whenever we do a take, we would hear a lawnmower in the background, and we'd always have to stop. We'd have to wait for the lawn mowing to end, and then we'd return back to filming with our fingers crossed, hoping that we'd be able to get this take in until the lawnmower goes again.
I piece of meat at the end of my fishing hook, just for me to devour. But it was good up to that point though, wasn't it? Yeah. I think that was just the main aim, was just the close. Did you not want me to move?
And this happened over and over and over again. There were dog walkers now coming because it was starting to get to late morning. It was a nightmare. But I'm very happy with the finished scene now. And I think that it was a job well done. It was the first time that Jade and I worked together as well. And the chemistry between us both was phenomenal. One of my favourite working relationships, and I appreciate the patience of David McEwen, our cinematographer, and Jason Candiano, the sound operator.
Like I said, I'm a teddy boy. I'm not nice, and I'm not meant to be liked.
Another story was when we were filming with the Ford Zephyr. We were just filming footage of the Ford Zephyr going back and forth, just so we had enough footage in the can to use for the edits. And there was a sequence where I was meant to set off in the car, in character. I looked rough and ready as the character. And the cameras were rolling. Action. I was about to set off, and before I set off in the car, what came in the foreground was a young lad with long hair. He had his shirt off, and he was doing wheelies on the bike, doing that to the camera. In hindsight, it's very funny, but when we were on a tight schedule that day, that was very, very frustrating. But it's a funny story to tell. But a lot of great memories here in Port Sunlight, and it really was the location, I think, that really solidified the geography and aesthetic of this fictional town of Listminster. You know, talking about this history is making me rather thirsty. Why don't you and I go for a quick drink right here at this beautiful old-fashioned beer garden located at Liverpool's second favourite subterranean pub, the Pilgrim Pub. The Pilgrim Pub frequents the likes of rockers, students and artists. The pub itself dates all the way back to the New Wave era of the 1980s. But the street that the pub resides on, Pilgrim Street, dates all the way back to the 18th century, where the likes of slavery and colonial plantations were common practice. These streets, these cobblestone streets that we're standing on now, are believed to be one of the very few cobbled streets left in Liverpool. Some of the buildings that we are surrounded by are part of the Heritage Registry. And just to think that these are the same cobbled stones that many goods were transferred by horse and cart back and forth to and from the ancient docks of Liverpool. Come and join me for a drink before I get run over.
The building and area has a dark and shady history worthy of a movie in its own right, complete with pirates and privateers. In 1793, a privateer ship called the Pilgrim, belonging to a Barton & Co., a trading company based in Liverpool, captured by force an enormous French brig called La Liberté. Returning to the city from Barbados with the 800-ton ship in tow and their bounty of silks, spices and mother of pearl, the Pilgrim privateers netted themselves and their employers £190,000, which in today's money is just shy of £35 million. From that point on, this street's former name, Jameson Street, was scrapped in honour of these bold, jolly tars and the fortune they amassed from overseas. Shortly after that, this building and its maritime connection saw it become a factory, making a very precious product indeed, from a highly sought-after imported resource. That's right, you guessed it. It became a chocolate factory. And no, not that sort of chocolate factory. In keeping with Liverpool's cultural and artistic nature, the mid-20th century saw this building become a paint warehouse and later an art gallery, before finally becoming the Pilgrim Pub. As well as a great selection of ales and spirits, the Pilgrim honours the musical heritage of the city by featuring a coin-operated jukebox on every table for playing all of your favourite rock and roll joints. Sadly, these antiques no longer function. The pub plays rock and roll via Spotify these days, but maybe, given the street's history, a few spirited rounds of What Shall We Do with the Drunken Sailor could be more appropriate.
So we are at the Pilgrim Pub, and the Pilgrim Pub is where the fight sequence took place between Marty and the Rats. This was really fun to do. So we had Tom Hayward choreographing the fight sequence, as well as an actor. Tom Hayward is also a professional wrestler as well, so we were able to collaborate on something that looked pretty tight, that looked quite heavy, a little bit exaggerated in certain areas as well, but it is the movies, you know, it's not a documentary we're making. And I was a little bit too enthusiastic at one of the rehearsals, and I accidentally gave him a nosebleed, but he was very kind, very gentle, very professional about it, so I appreciate Tom being that lovely towards me. But it was an interesting dynamic because you had Marty, who was very rough and ready, but then you had Husky, played by Bill Heeks, who was a powerhouse, and then you had Tom Hayward's character, Bruiser, as the brawler. It was just this very interesting dynamic where, you know, the bigger the opponent, Marty had to play a little bit dirtier than he would do fighting someone his own size as well. This was a very messy shoot. A lot of blood, an exaggerated amount of blood as there probably would have been in any other fight sequence. And it was just absolutely fantastic. We were really tight for time that day as well. and we were under a lot of pressure. There was a lot that we wanted to do that we couldn't do, and we had to decide in the moment really that we couldn't do certain things because of the time. But I am happy with the fight sequence. I'm happy and proud of everyone involved as well, and I hope you, the viewer, enjoy watching it as well, regardless how goofy it can be. It's good fun, and that's what cinema is all about, especially a film of this nature where it doesn't take itself too seriously. It was great fun, and I hope you had fun watching it.
Because we've been looking for a reason to kick the shit out of you for quite some time.
One part of history we'd remiss to overlook is the part which gave birth to the culture that Dandylicious is all about. The Teddy Boy. The origins of the Edwardians, Teddy Boys or Teds for short, date back to the Second World War. Following the decimation of Europe, an effort was made by European governments to preserve what was left of infrastructure after an enormous and expensive conflict. It took years to recover from it. The social environment from which the Teds emerged was one of unbelievable cruelty and pain. Their childhoods torn apart by the Blitz and evacuations, and after this it was broken homes, lost fathers and hard toil. On top of that, a shortage of resources. Items like food, textiles, hygiene products, and many more, which lasted right up until 1954. It was a coincidence in some ways that the drapes and suits, which became the iconic staple of the Teddy Boy look, came to be. These clothes were elaborate in comparison to the poverty that children of the war were used to, and not only were they a higher class of clothing item, they were also made quite affordable to the everyday working class rascal. The draped suit was a tailor's experiment, and a perfect example of stiff upper lip English ingenuity. Due to the lack of resources from rationing, London's West End gentlemen's tailors began to experiment with a new design that was based loosely on the turn-of-the-century menswear and wouldn't, therefore, take up too many resources to manufacture. After all, young servicemen with full pay packets were coming home every day from the continent, and they would need to look good in order to, so to speak, replenish the population. As it happened, these suits were a complete flop. They were a mixture of different styles, slightly Edwardian, taking hints from contemporary styles at the time, like the US suits popularised by Cab Calloway and then later by Kid Creole, by applying a more restrained and English attitude towards tailoring. The servicemen were not amused, but for the young men and women who had just spent the last decade with empty stomachs and clothes covered in soot and dust, the draped suit was just about the finest thing they had ever seen. Within a few years, the Teddy Boy emerged in his new fitted suit, now fashioned and repurposed, away with that restrained, no-nonsense attitude of snobby tailors and stuffy Edwardian fashions. The streets had claimed the Edwardian style, and they had added creepers and drainpipe trousers for the quick getaways, Slim Jim and bolo ties for hurried dressing and undressing, a flick knife for taking care of business, and a new hairstyle, coiffed and slicked, which was affectionately known as the duck's arse, but in my opinion, it was the dog's bollocks. The wonderful thing about Britain is there is history everywhere you look. So we picked out several different locations, one of which was a secure compound in Cheshire which keeps and restores historic objects from the 40s, and the other is right here, Morton Shore on the Wirral. Here, the huge concrete Dragon's Teeth tank defences lined the beaches and sea walls, and they stood on duty until the 1960s. Many elderly residents who lived through the war recall watching the dogfights in the sky over the Mersey River. Dotting the shore and just up Borrowdale Road, not far from here, England's famous Ack-Ack anti-air guns were set up to tear into the hulls of any Luftwaffe pilots who dared approach these shores. A couple of years later, and they'd have the Teddy Boys to contend with as well. The brave men and women who served this country went above and beyond what was expected of them and beat back the would-be invaders. But I do wonder how a fight with the Teds for England's lands might have panned out.
So right now we are at Morton Shore, and right behind me is the lighthouse at Morton Shore that you see in the opening scene of Dandylicious. And it's that shot where it pans from the top all the way down and we're introduced to our main character. That was only a very short shot in the film, but little do people know when it comes to filmmaking, sometimes shots that only last in the film for a matter of seconds can take hours to do. And that was exactly the case when we were filming right in front of this lighthouse from the 1700s. For this scene in particular, when we're being introduced to the character, this was an opportunity for us to experiment and to be really creative. And some interesting things happened, such as things that didn't need to happen, things that didn't make sense, but the camera was rolling, we were present, so we just did it. But it was a very windy day that day, and I believe it was one of our first outdoor shoots, and the cinematographer, David McEwen, was filming, and because the wind was so heavy, we couldn't really understand one another. So there was a lot of miscommunication. There were times where he would say action and I didn't hear him, and I'd just be waiting endlessly. And there's a little bit of bickering going on. Nothing to take personally. It's sort of a filmmaker's love language to bicker with one another. And then by the end of it, you give one another a hug, or you buy a pint, or whatever the case.
I'm rolling. Is camera rolling, David?
Yeah.
Alright, just let us know in future.
And action.
But start rolling, camera rolling. Scene 1, shot 1, take 2. You need to say action, mate.
You can tell by my fucking camera movement, man.
Yeah, but I'll just need to know. Just
Right.
do it traditionally.
And action.
Well, it was a really experimental time, and it was a very fun day that day to really just allow the character to breathe around its surroundings, its heritage, its historical surroundings, and it really is a stunning place, and I'm glad that we were able to film here at Morton Shore. As you will see when you watch Dandylicious in 2024, we succeeded with the huge undertaking of creating a world from scratch just by merely using our surroundings, paying attention to the finer details to uncover little pieces of history, some you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of. And I do feel that it's important that we, as British people, wear our history on our sleeves and pass these stories on from generation to generation. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you are an industry tycoon like Lord William Lever, or whether you are a juvenile, free-spirited delinquent like the teddy boy Marty from Dandylicious. It's history that makes us who we are today. And I think it's very important to pay attention to those finer details and to unfold our history. You never know where we come from. And I hope this film serves as a great example of what you can really, truly find and utilise to help create a world from scratch.
Thank you.